Our next to last presenter is appearing virtually, and we're very happy to have her. Her name is Amira Armand. She is again going to address CMMC issues. She is the president of Chieri Solutions, the vice chair of C3PAO Stakeholder Forum, and the chief editor of the CMMCaudit.org. She is a CMMC provisional instructor and active blogger on all things CMMC and NIST SB 800-171. So, Amira, are you there? Welcome.
And I I trust that I'm talking to y'all. So who am I? I'm the president of Chieri Solutions, a C3PO candidate. I'm a provisional instructor. I'm currently teaching CCP classes with Edwards Performance Solutions. I am also the vice chair of the C3PO Stakeholder Forum. And I'm talking fast because I only have 20 minutes to talk about scoping. That's not enough time, but I'll try. So, first step to scoping is you need to know what is connected to your network, what is a potential asset. The expectation is that you got to kind of be perfect on this. So, if you're a small company, you should know every single laptop that's connected to your information system, every single phone that's connected to your information system potentially. If you're a big company, if you've got 50,000 employees and you're trying to get a CMMC assessment of that entire network, same expectation, which is really hard, right? So if you're very small, you can do stuff like manually walk around an inventory or look at all the devices that have ever connected to your domain. If you are big, you're going to need something like a network access control system. Now, on the left side of the screen, we've got some ideas for asset things that you might want to talk about, right? You might want to have in your inventory, end user devices, your firewalls, your people, media, right? But when you actually are describing them to an assessor, you need to be able to pull out a list that looks like the right side, right? Unique identification of each asset. So we're not just going to talk about all of our Windows computers. We need to actually be able to get down to here's, the 20 laptops and their computer names and hopefully their serial numbers. That's kind of a baseline expectation. Honestly, this is even for level 1, right? There's an expectation you know what is on your network that's part of your scope. Step 2, know what CUI you have and where it is. And for this, I recommend making a table, or multiple tables, right? You are going to want to have a data owner identified for each type of CUI. Now, if you're saying, and this is an area where you can get kind of generic, right? You can say Windows laptops will have CUI that their owners deal with. The email server might have CUI, the file server might have CUI, right? But for each project or general grouping of CUI, you should have a data owner who has responsibility for basically managing access, right? They should be the one that knows what the CUI is, why you have it, whether it's safe to get rid of it or not, and whether or not this new person should have access to it. And then you should explain it in as simple a way as possible to your assessor, right? And honestly, this is the same way that you're going to be explaining it to your users too, right? So the assessors and the users both need to know how CUI is allowed to move in, out, and through your environment. If you do not tell people these are the ways you can do it, they will come up with their own ways, right? So make it super clear, super easy. That's another common problem is people make it too convoluted, and then the users go connect to Dropbox and stick the CUI up there, right? To get it done. So try and make these methods as functional as possible, and then drill them into your users. And ideally, have a few ways, right? Don't have 30 different ways or potential. Have a few ways that everybody has to do it. All right, so that was the preamble. Now we actually need to categorize your assets to identify what's in your scope and how they're going to be assessed. So this diagram here is kind of the overall flow chart for how you would categorize your assets. It is part of the scoping analysis that I and several other provisional instructors and provisional assessors and Allison Giddens, hi Allison, worked on. And this will be part of the slide deck if you need it, but I'm going to keep moving on. So first off, you should identify what assets are out of scope. Things can be out of scope if they cannot store, process, or transmit CUI because you have adequate separation, such as a really good firewall in between. You don't have trust in between your networks. They don't have the password to your stuff, right? Or an inherent inability to store, process, or transmit CUI. So maybe your desk is out of scope, right? Because people aren't going to be writing CUI diagrams on the desk. Everybody's going, I could. But most people don't. One nuance of out of scope is that they do not provide security protections to CUI assets. So there's common situations where you could have an asset that does some sort of security for you, which is fully separated, and there's no way it can get CUI on it, right? So most people are going to be thinking of a SIM, maybe a cloud-based SIM that's not on your network. And even though those are separated and not going to have CUI, because they perform a security function that is required by CMMC, they cannot be out of scope. All right, next category. So we're kind of going, okay, is it out of scope? Yes or no? All right, so we already just said all this stuff is out of scope. Next, we're going to say, is this a security protection asset? So technically, according to the scoping guide, it could have CUI on it. But realistically, and this is confirmed by conversations with DIBCAC, if an asset actually has your CUI on it, it should probably be a CUI asset, okay? Because CUI assets have the highest expectation for security. So in my opinion, recommendation, if it doesn't have CUI, look at hard for security protection asset. Security protection assets are considered accessible from the perspective of CUI. So what does that mean? If your change management database provides security for CUI, if you've written in your SSP, this is how we do this practice for our CUI assets, then it is an SPA and it's accessible based on that. And this is a little bit where we're not totally sure what the right answer is, but there's a real possibility because of the way of because of the way the scoping guide is written, there's a real possibility that assessors are going to read that security protection assets need to do every single applicable practice, which there's problems with that. It makes it much harder to pass your assessment if you're checking whether your SIM has account lockout thresholds, whether your SIM has vulnerabilities patched, right? So we're not quite sure what the right answer is. Get ready for both, unfortunately. Next, we ask, is this asset a specialized asset, right? So we've already thrown out the out of scopes. We've said, here's our security protection assets because they perform a function that is required by CMMC. And now we go, okay, for the rest of the stuff, could it possibly be a specialized asset? Specialized assets don't get fully assessed, right? So as an OSC, you're going to be highly motivated to make as many things specialized as possible. Categories, first off, government property, right? Was it given to you by the government? For example, if you're working out of a government facility, right, not accessible. If you are the recipient of some whiz-bang service from Project Spectrum, provided by the government, not accessible. So that's pretty cool, but not a very common asset category. Internet of Things, which are defined as a physical device that has a sensor and programmability and network. Those are specialized assets. Examples could be cameras, smart lights. The way I think of it is if 20 years ago, the device was not connected to the network, and now it is, it might be an IoT. Operational technology, the equipment performs physical action. So all of our manufacturers are out there going, yes, right? Not fully accessible. Now, restricted information system. This one's an interesting one. Essentially, if you have to have that system to do your contract, right? There's no option for it. It's a prototype. It's something you're building on as part of the contract. You may be able to fit that system into this restricted information system. And I think, though it's really going to be up to the OSC and the assessor, I think that development systems might fit into this category, right? If you have to have it set up a certain way so that you can build the product, it might not be fully accessible, right? So look real hard at this category. A lot of companies have development systems that they're not sure what they're going to do about. So look at this category for it. And then finally, we have test equipment, which is not for development systems. Test equipment is really described as hardcore testing analysis equipment, right? Spectrum analyzers, oscilloscopes, okay? So if you're a shipyard, yep, but not a whole lot of companies have that. Now, specialized assets may hold CUI. You should show that you are managing these devices according to their risk, but you do not have to do every practice. All right, so we've gotten through most of our stuff. Now we're looking at the remaining two possible categories. So if the asset at this point, if you haven't picked a different one, if it has CUI in it, right, or passing through it or processed by it, then it's a CUI asset. And this is the one that's really going to get assessed for sure, right? So you need to make sure you're doing every practice in relation to protecting these CUI assets. And then finally, we have contractor risk managed assets. These are assets that do not have CUI on them, that should not have CUI on them, but they could because they're not physically separated or logically separated from your CUI assets, meaning they're on the same network, they're using a service that's connected to your CUI. Maybe it's the same file share, but they're not allowed to get to that exact folder. And again, just like specialized assets, you should show that you're using a risk-based approach to security. You should know exactly what you have. And actually, I have some breaking news on this topic. So let me show you an email I just got yesterday. So one of the things I do is I send emails to DoD CIO a lot, and I recommend everyone do this. And I ask them whether we need to document how contractor risk managed assets are performing every practice, good or bad, in our SSP. Specifically, I said, do we need to write in our SSP whether our CRMA devices are limiting unsuccessful logon attempts? And I got back this really nice email, which says no. Okay, so, and I think that this applies equally to CRMA as well as to specialized assets, because the language in the scoping guide is exactly the same for them. So according to this, the SSP would just need enough information to show how they're being managed in accordance with your contractor's risk-based information security policy, procedures, and practices. So that's really good news for all the OSCs out there. All right, let me get back to our previously scheduled presentation. Now, this last bullet better not have CUI on it, right? So the idea of a contractor risk managed asset is it's not supposed to have CUI, because you are keeping CUI off of it by telling your users not to put CUI on it, by putting data loss protection out, some other means, right? Assessors are allowed to do limited spot checks, which means if from our perspective, you're going to be telling us, oh yeah, we don't have CUI in our email, right? We're spotless. All of our users are perfect, right? And the assessor's like, okay, for sure. We're allowed to go check a couple users' emails and see if there's CUI. So, make sure that this is for real, because I guarantee the assessors have seen the tricks. What happens if you get CUI on your contractor risk managed asset without your permission, right? Against policy, your customer keeps sending you CUI through email, and you've told them don't do it over and over again. Treat it like an incident, okay? Create an incident. Get your security team involved. Remove the CUI from that asset. Attempt to stop it at the source again, right? That's how you keep your CRMAs from becoming CUI assets.